All right, welcome along to our Holstein Friesian webinar. And today, welcome to everybody, and we're welcome to you, Ruth. It's great to have you with us here on our Holstein Friesian webinar. We're diving into the topic that's becoming increasingly important for the future of our sector: innovation in livestock methane reduction. As farmers, you're to the forefront of producing world-class. Are at the forefront of producing world-class food while navigating the shifting expectations from regulators, markets, and consumers. Methane is a big part of that conversation. It's also an area where New Zealanders are generally leading the way worldwide in research and innovation. The challenge, of course, is turning that science into practical and workable solutions for pasture-based farming systems like ours in New Zealand. That's why we're thrilled to be joined today by Ruth Leary from AgZeroNZ, and Ruth and her team are right in the centre of New Zealand's methane reduction research and efforts, coordinating projects, supporting innovation, and helping ensure that tools being developed are fit for purpose on farms, not just in laboratories. Today's session, or this evening's session, was all about giving you, the people out there, the farmers and people watching, clarity. What technologies are emerging, what's realistic for pasture systems, what's available now and what's coming soon, and what's still on the horizon. And most importantly, what this all means for your farming business. So Ruth will walk us through the current state of play, the most promising innovations that are out there at the moment, and how farmers can get involved or prepare for what lies ahead. I guess it's a subject that some farmers just push under the carpet, but they've got to face up in reality because it's happening out there. We'll also leave plenty of time for questions, so feel free to drop those into our chat box as we go. So Ruth, thank you for joining us.
Thank
It's
you,
all over to
Southland.
you.
Yeah, thanks so much. What an intro. That was a really good context setting introduction. And yeah, good evening, everybody. I hope it's sunny where you are. It's actually sunny where I am, which is really nice.
Looks like it.
And I do have some slides to share. So if I select the share, those will come up. So what I might do is do that in a moment. But just firstly, to introduce myself, Ruth Leary. I head the strategy and engagement at AgriZero New Zealand. I'm originally from Southland, but I do live in Auckland now, although I spend a fair bit of time travelling around. Actually was in Waimumu a couple of weeks ago for the regional field day. So my brother is a dairy farmer down there, but I did grow up on a sheep, beef and deer farm originally, and a lot of the district actually is now converted to dairy farms. So it's good to have that. I use my brother often as my own unofficial farmer focus group. We do have a specific appointed farmer focus group as well, but often I run things past him as well. So what I'll do is just introduce to you a bit about what AgriZero is, talk you through the things that we're scanning the world for, the why, what's coming, what's in the portfolio, and yeah, and really happy to take any questions from you at the end. And I think there's a Q&A or a chat box that you can write those questions in. So what I'll do is push share. And I'm hoping maybe if someone, maybe Selwyn, you can give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen okay there.
Yep.
It's coming through.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, fabulous. Great. Okay. All right, so AgriZero New Zealand. We have been running actually now for 3 years, so quite a new organisation. And we were, yeah, I guess I started with the organisation on day one, actually originally seconded out of a dairy company. Quite a few of us were. The joint venture was a new thing, a collaboration actually between partners. And as you can see on the screen, we're actually a partnership between the private sector, agribusinesses and banks. There's 10 of them you can see. So the likes of Fonterra, they're a significant shareholder of AgriZero. Also A2 Milk and Synlait in the dairy space, but also the banks, obviously working with a lot of farmers, and also Ravensdown on the fertilizer side. So those companies put money into AgriZero purely to really focus our investment onto finding suitable and practical tools for Kiwi farmers to use on their farms to drive emissions down and increase their productivity and profitability. And really that is about maintaining the competitiveness of our exports on farm in New Zealand as we send them overseas, because the premium customers keep demanding and wanting really premium but sustainable and low footprint products. And that still is true today, regardless of some narratives you may see coming from offshore, that we still are trying to make sure we're top of the leaderboard as far as emissions efficient product goes. So those companies on screen, the private sector companies like A2, ANZ, ANZCO, ASB, BNZ, Fonterra, Rabobank, Ravensdown, Silverfern Farms and Synlait, put money into AgriZero, and the government has matched that dollar for dollar. So we are a public-private partnership, but essentially we're an investment fund, and we're investing in those technologies. We do work really closely with the Ag Emissions Centre. Their focus is really on the research, that foundational research that is needed to validate things in that lab scale that you were talking about, Selwyn. Our focus really is to drive through these products to commercialization, and actually not in the lab, but to having a product in the hand of a farmer. So trying to accelerate that progress from the research. So we do work closely with them because they're often pioneering and discovering things in the lab. So a little bit about the why. Look, we know that Kiwi farmers actually are among the most efficient in the world. We do have some of our competing export nations claiming their place at the top of the pack now, and certainly making good progress, which is why we don't want to sit still here in New Zealand. But really our farmers are really efficient. However, we have some of our key customers who demand a lot of product from New Zealand, and some of them are listed on the screen there, have quite ambitious science-based targets for their Scope 3 emissions reductions, which is where our exports of milk and meat, for example, are hitting into their supply chain. So those companies themselves don't directly control those emissions. Those are coming from the product that they're bringing in. We also have, some of our free trade agreements have specific reference to our focus and need to reduce the emissions of our export products from agriculture. And really it's about staying the top of the leaderboard, as particularly some of those exporting countries for dairy. We'll specifically focus mostly on dairy today, given we're talking to you guys, have quite intensive systems, and really our pasture-based system has a lot of advantages, for the way that we farm here in New Zealand. But what they do have is more levers in a way to pull, more available tools today to actually specifically reduce their methane. So things like anaerobic digesters, for example, which can remove all the emissions from the effluent that actually gets captured if an animal is housed, whereas ours is sort of out on the paddock. Also things like feed additives, electrification, all of those things can happen in intensive housed systems. So we want to maintain our footprint, but also keep farming in a pasture-based system. So that's why we're hunting for tools that suit the way that we farm here in New Zealand. So what we do is we're scanning the world looking for solutions. We're not just looking within New Zealand, although, not surprisingly, there is a few of our investments actually are based in New Zealand and New Zealand companies, because obviously we know the context well. And, surprisingly enough, New Zealand has been thinking long and hard about this, because ultimately, not only is methane a greenhouse gas, but it is also energy that the animal is essentially burping out. So we scan the world for solutions, and we're really focused on taking a portfolio approach for farmers. We know that we want to give farmers choice. So farmers will have different preferences, different farming systems, and so different tools may feel better or easier for them to be able to use. We also know that some of these these are startup companies that we're investing in. These companies are developing solutions. They are still often at quite an early stage. So we know that not all of them are going to be successful. So we actually need to make sure we're taking a number of different investments across the portfolio in hopes that at least a few of those are going to be really successful ones for farmers to use on farm. So if you look across the portfolio today, we've got 4 different types of products that can be given, classed as inhibitors, but all have different modes of action and different sources, from plant sources mainly, to reduce the methane that gets formed in the gut. So AgZeroNZ Biotech are a Swedish company. Ruminant Biotech actually is a New Zealand startup. That company have developed, using an ingredient that's found in Asparagopsis seaweed, they have got a slow release bolus that gradually releases in a controlled manner the active substance up to 100 plus days. And what that means is animals out grazing can actually have this slowly acting and not having to be fed every day a supplement. So they are going to be launching their product into beef animals first. So if you've got some dairy beef, it might be quite interesting. And ultimately do plan to have a solution for dairy cattle as well. But, there is a very rigorous regulatory process that has to be gone through for these products. So ultimately, Ruminant Biotech right now are in the final stages of the assessment of their information dossier with the Ministry of Primary Industries. They have an Ag Chem Vet Med team who go through a really rigorous process. Given, New Zealand exports so much, it's critical that we ensure the safety and welfare of our animals, the safety of the food supply chain, and just making sure that, I guess, everything meets the criteria needed to be able to give it to animals. So that's really promising. We're hoping sort of later this year that they'll get a registration decision and be able to start using that product on farm. And they've done, tens and tens of animal trials with their product already today. AgriZeroNZ products, that's an early stage UK based company, but we've set up a specific joint venture in New Zealand. They've actually found through their program of work with daffodils, interestingly, which have been grown for, on one hand, a compound actually that treats Alzheimer's, galantamine. Certain daffodils grown in the particular conditions that actually suit the rolling hill country in New Zealand have really good quantities of a product called hemanthamine, which is a strong methane inhibitor as well when you blend it into like a dairy feed. So they're just sort of optimizing and trialing their product. And so far we've had one trial at Lincoln University with that. There's also a methane inhibitor program in conjunction with Zoetis that has been running for quite a while. They're trying to find a small molecule inhibitor, which means there's lots of options for delivery mechanism for that, that has no issues, obviously, with things like a residue that ideally can help the productivity of animals as well. On the vaccine side, we've got 2 investments in that space. We really doubled down on trying to accelerate the progress in the whole area of a methane vaccine because of promising progress, but also because a vaccine is really talked about as a holy grail solution because of the low input, low cost existing farm practice, and no sort of risk of anything like a residue getting into the milk supply. So with modern, scientific advances, they've made amazing progress, and there has been proof of concept now achieved of vaccinating an animal and getting a methane reduction. So now it's about optimizing the product and going through that regulatory process that I mentioned before. On the pasture side, if you're trying to find solutions for a pasture-based farming system, then the pasture itself is one way. So Biolumic are a company, a New Zealand startup, actually also have some operations in the US now, that have actually validated a technology on other crops initially using natural UV light, but at different wavelengths, different treatments onto the seeds of plants. Then, given that plants naturally express their genes based on the conditions, they're using that principle really to use specific recipes of this UV light to generate different genetic traits in the plant naturally. So this is not a GE or GMO technology at all. It's UV light on the seeds. And for this one, they're working on ryegrass project for us and aiming to get, a slightly lifted lipid content in the ryegrass, which actually leads to less methane being produced, but also more productivity per hectare. Probiotics. So there's 3 different probiotic companies we've invested in, all using sort of slightly different approaches, but actually the underlying principle is that in the rumen, of your dairy cow, you have a range of methanogens, but also you have a range of bugs, and they are there is some variance in those. And in your natural herd of dairy cows, you will have a range of animals that produce more or less methane and are more or less efficient at the same time. And if you identify the common bugs that occur in the rumen of animals that are highly efficient and produce low methane, then you can start to select specific probiotics to actually slightly really move the rumen in the direction of being a low methane emitter. You're essentially trying to seed the rumen with the good bugs that make it be more efficient and make less methane. So that's the underlying principle there. These would be things that probably would be dry blended into a feed at this stage, although some of the companies are working on things like oral drenches to be given in early life and having a longer duration there. We're looking at manure treatment. We do have some projects we're working on in the adoption space there for treating manure, so some of the effluent pond treatments. We'll be able to talk more about that in a couple of months when we've got some official announcement we can make, but that's quite exciting. On the genetics side, there's a company called Embryo, which actually is an Australian company. We actually had them out here recently talking to our farmer focus group. They've got a technology platform to accelerate genetic gain in dairy animals, actually, firstly for New Zealand. So there's using sort of embryo techniques, but also identifying the genetics of both of the male and female genetics. So they're really focused on a technology platform that accelerates the genetic gain. I think their tagline had been 7 years and 7 days at one point. So if you're accelerating genetic gain and you can select the specific genetics, then if you've got more efficient animals that are producing less methane, they can be accelerated through the herd much faster too, and you'll get a reduction in emissions that way too. And there is programs of work we're involved with, LIC and CRV, for example, on producing more efficient, lower methane animals too. We are also working for some sheep programs, but probably not as exciting for you guys. We do have other areas that we're still looking for investments in as well, on the adoption technologies, so things that will help farmers apply or give things to animals. And also Armour, actually, which is in a wearable device, and that's quite an early stage company, but they have done some really promising farm trials in Canterbury. This is a wearable device that has a lot of co-benefits, but one of them is to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. So nitrous oxide emissions nitrous oxide is actually quite a potent greenhouse gas. It lasts in the atmosphere a lot longer than methane does. And actually in New Zealand, it is one of the drivers of our greenhouse gas footprint as a country. But actually the predominant source is coming through from the urine of animals going onto the pasture. And those, concentrated sort of nitrate patches that you get. And that's actually really hard to think about trying to reduce or abate. But this technology actually not only sort of helps reduce the emissions, but it helps actually make the most of that natural nitrogen by spreading it out and allowing better uptake by the grass. So ultimately it's intended for farmers to be able to buy significantly less fertilizer, use the natural nitrogen in the urine, and have less nitrous oxide emissions as well. Right, click my slide. So this is just, I guess, our latest scorecard. What we do actually every quarter is try and do an update. We put this on our website, or if you're interested, please do email and we can send you an update. We're trying to share really transparently, given the nature of our funding is both public and private sector. A lot of agribusinesses are behind this because it's viewed as a really important sort of program of work for our export markets. And so we want to show what funds we've got and what we've spent, and also what we've spent it on. And also from that, the types of investments and the types of technologies. So on this list, it's just really listing the names of those companies out, the type of tool that a farmer might use. So we've tried to group them into categories, but they all are slightly different. And then the animals that are addressed by that technology, plus the specific funds that we've invested so far. So with those investments we make, most of them are venture investments. That's where we're taking an equity stake in a company, a startup company, and get a shareholding. As part of that investment, we have requirements around the company commercialising their product in New Zealand, and also going through any of the processes for regulation and so on for New Zealand specifically. New Zealand actually is a relatively small market to, if you're trying to sell into dairy, for example. We've got about, not 5 million milking cows, and globally there's 1.5 billion cattle, and I think 300 million of them are in Brazil. And so there is actually some big markets offshore where companies can sell these things. So we want to make sure we're investing in companies, but actually we get the technology to you in New Zealand first as well as a priority. And sort of we're making great progress. The companies we're investing in are making good progress. Like I said, some are early, some might fail, but we do have Ruminant Biotech coming up with their product soon. And we will be making announcements, as I said, on some other activities we're doing on accelerating the adoption of a broad range of things, including some manure treatment as well. So far, 11 ventures investments. So that's ventures team is led by my colleague David McDonald. He was at Fonterra in his previous role. We do have my colleague Deborah Roche. She runs the catalyst function at AgriZero. So what Catalyst does is look across the landscape and go, what is slowing us down? What are there that might be constraining the progress? What could we invest in that might offer more system-wide benefits? So the types of things that I've done is invest in some on-farm trials that can answer multiple questions at once on how to give things to animals, how animals respond. Also looking at things like infrastructure, measurement and testing as well. We've still got 39 things on our radar. Some of those are early stage companies that need a bit more progress. Some of them are in various stages of due diligence. So what we do when we discover, I think we've had about 260 or 70 different companies we've met in the methane or nitrous oxide space all around the world. We actually go through quite a rigorous process with that of learning more about the technology and if it's applicable or it could be applicable to a pasture-based farming system, and then going through a due diligence process. So we enter into kind of a review. We get a lot of expertise from outside of AgriZero, actually external independent scientific experts that are specific to the area that we have. Then we prepare a lot of material and do the due diligence process. We then go to an investment committee, again, appointed body of experts who assess, I guess, an investment or not, and we then make a decision to invest if they give the go-ahead. So that's really what our process is. Let me just see what else I've got here. So this is kind of a snapshot of when things are coming to market. Again, we were set up 3 years ago. We were trying to invest in, this breakthrough technology that will work in a pasture-based system. Some of it quite early, some was already in flight, and we're just trying to really accelerate it. So the first thing coming to market, I mentioned, that's the bolus for cattle, specifically designed for initially beef, but then the hopes are into dairy a couple of years after that. So that's 2026 for commercialisation. Then into 2027, we've got a number of our ventures looking at the moment that's their commercialisation timing. So some of the probiotics and enzyme solutions. One of the probiotics is actually more of an enzyme from the probiotic. And also the pasture, so biolumic pasture. They've made great progress in their trials and proven the concept, so they're aiming for a 2027 commercialisation as well. And then into 2028 with vaccines and other inhibitors and probiotics following after that. These are all contingent on the regulatory, well, most of them are contingent on the regulatory process, but we do work really closely with the companies to make sure they're linked in to those, the regulatory consultants in New Zealand, the farm consultants, but also the regulators. So have regular meetings with MPI, the ACVM team, AgChem Vet Med team, who essentially treat these things as they do any other vet medicine to make sure that they're suitable. This is a picture of our farmer focus group. So we realised quite quickly that despite all having our own backgrounds or experiences across the primary sector and farms, actually we need kind of some independent body of farmers who we can test things with and really make sure that they give input for us into the fit for purpose nature of the different tools that we look at. I did mention, I think there was 260 or so we've looked at now. We've only made 11 ventures investments out of that. And so you can see that actually it's, you know, and even then, some of those investments we made are still early stage companies. So it's actually pretty hard to find the really good things that could be applicable for New Zealand. So this group of many of our startups actually face to face had workshops with them, had that kind of Q&A and really testing and telling these startups what we need here in New Zealand to make something practical to implement on farm. They talked to us about all the matters relating to implementation and adoption of these things on farm as well. Yeah, and that's just a summary, really. I think I'm getting to the end of my slides, but just we do have that scorecard if anybody is interested in keeping a track. It's either on our website or we do have a quarterly email list, and we'd be really happy to add any of you to that as well. I think that's the end of my slides. My email address is up there, but really happy to take any questions. I might stop sharing. Unless you want me to flick anything up, I can pull that up after.
I guess I'm sort of sitting here making a few notes, and it's a bit like that TV program, The Shark's Den or whatever. They come along and they have these new innovators, and they're sitting there and they're giving them go, yes, or I'll buy your business for such and such or whatever. That's just a bit of a joke aside, but I guess that's people are coming along and saying we can provide you with a solution, we think, and then it's basically putting a plan in place for you or for them, for you, for everyone else, and it's up to your group to say, well, it's feasible, not feasible. Is there a time frame from when you, like a company or a startup group, come to you and go, well, we think we can reduce methane by using this product or doing this thing on the farm? Is there a time frame that you go, well, you'll need some research, more research, you'll need a lot more time. We need it foolproof before we can even market it. So have you got a time frame?
Yeah, great question. Because what we do get is companies approach us at all different stages. And often these are early companies and they might have some data. It might be animal data, it might be lab data. So we ultimately defer to the experts on the robustness of that data and if it can be considered, you know, by our regulator, for example. Would they consider that appropriate level of data for inclusion for, you know, a dossier that you'd need to submit to get the product approved? Is it suitable for inclusion? You know, we have a greenhouse gas inventory in New Zealand that tracks our greenhouse gases. They have quite a robust criteria too for the types of data they need to prove something actually works rather than maybe it works, but we don't know. But the time frame, we can act pretty quickly if we need to on the investments, depending on the stage the company's at and if there's, you know, other companies also trying to invest or, you know, precisely what the situation is. But, you know, our ultimate process usually takes a few months because it does take a few months to get right in and you have to share, you know, confidential information under NDA. You have to then get that externally and independently assessed by experts as to the robustness of that data. And you're still, you know, having to back companies that, you know, things can work all the way until they don't work sometimes too. So, you know, you're never going to have the perfect amount of all of the data you want. You sometimes have to support the things that look really practical, that has got a good team, they're really focused on making it work for the New Zealand context. On the time frame, you know, AgriZero has an ambition that was set by our shareholders, and it's purposely a really bold one. But what we're trying to do is align it to some of those targets of the big global buyers of New Zealand's products. So the SBTI Scope 3 emissions reduction targets. It's 30% reduction by 2030, and so we have a really detailed investment criteria that we refer to when we're doing the initial scan of these products. That's before it even enters into a due diligence. So we will give it a rating based on several criteria, and the way that's weighted. Things like the efficacy of the product is one of the big ones. So what are the reductions that they're achieving in animals or in the lab and calculate animals? What is the reach of this product in New Zealand? By that, I mean, how many of the different ruminant livestock classes in New Zealand could you use this for, and how impactful would that be? So if it was only for, you know, I don't know, like dairy cows are an important stock class for us, but we are also looking at beef and sheep solutions as well. And also for deer. A lot of these things should also hopefully work for deer. But if it was only a very specific age group and that was all it was going to be, then we probably wouldn't consider it. And then all the other things we think about are that what's it like to commercially scale? Can it be affordable once it's scaled? Is there any, issues with scaling, or, the logistics or the raw material supply, all that type of thing we go through as well. So the time frame, we ideally want a few things in the market before 2030, at least 2 to 3. But the time frame for us to make the investments and assess really is dependent on how much information is available and how quickly from the company, and then how quickly we can get that independently assessed and verified and then presented up to our investment committee.
I think it's important to note, Ruth, when talking to you the other day, when we had a bit of a catch up online, that you're not actually commercially trying to sell a product. You are there that's, I think, something that's you probably need to touch on, that you're not actually saying this is what you should use, or we suggested use that. You are giving the tools to companies to actually produce their product, and then it becomes up to the farmers.
So we literally are just investors, really. Although we're probably quite strategic investors. So what we do is try and support these companies to understand the New Zealand market, and meet with the regulator, who is also our investor. So we can enable that, but also the meetings with some of our agribusinesses, like a Fonterra, for example, we can enable those kind of commercial discussions too. But we're an investor, and we ultimately, all we want to achieve is the impact of reducing emissions, and ultimately, hopefully also returns from those companies being successful. And those returns will be shared back through our shareholders. And so we're investing in a whole portfolio of things, and we will double dip. Like, we will back more than one company in a specific area, because what we just want is we want something to work, and we want it to be successful, and we want to give farmers the choice as well, because some might like a bolus and chuck a bolus in, get over a year, like I think it works out about 24% total reduction with just one dose. Some farmers are bolusing their animals already. Other farmers might be quite happy to blend in a probiotic with their daily feed. Some might just want to plant the ryegrass. It really, different options is all we're about.
I guess there's time coming up, we're talking about dairy cows here, that if farmers are proving and are actually reducing their methane, then they may be getting like bonus payments from Fonterra, etc. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. And that's the important thing, because we know farmers will ultimately need to be rewarded for taking action to reduce emissions, as they should be, as in other areas, with carbon, for example, in forestry, there's reward and there's a carbon price. But ultimately, we can't ask farmers to do something if they're not going to benefit from it, like a new activity. So, some farmers might be really passionate about the environment and want to take action, but the majority will be thinking, what's the impact on me, on my farm, on my P&L, on how I spend my time? And it needs to add up and make sense for them to go ahead and adopt these new technologies.
Yeah, it's like
incentives ultimately. Incentives from processors is one way, and in setting incentives through the value chain, where that actually, the support for farmers can actually be shared by their processors, but also the end customers taking part and contributing money into that as well.
So have you seen already a reduction?
So already, no, not from the things we've invested in, because these are early stage things and they're not in the market just yet. We've seen a reduction in animals in the big animal trials that have been done to prove these things. We've seen that happen, but not actually, if you look at New Zealand's footprint, I think as of the most recent data from the inventory is they have to backdate it and calculate, but it was around 53% of our emissions are coming from agriculture. That's all that we're focused on. AgriZero is the methane and the nitrous oxide from the agriculture sector. And so ultimately we want to contribute to that coming down, but still growing or maintaining at least the production out of New Zealand. And by 2030, you know, we've got a really bold ambition on a 30% reduction.
Hopefully you're on target. So any people got any questions they want to ask Ruth?
I can see some in the chat.
Oh, you can?
Actually.
I can't, unfortunately.
Oh,
mine, so,
well,
so you might be able to answer that.
Want, Selwyn. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that'd be good.
Yeah, I think there might be some in the Q&A, but I can see in the chat. Sean, do you have a time frame for when the first technology will be available in New Zealand, as well as how they will be accounted for in reporting, like i.e. Frontier Insights? So the first technology, I may have answered it during the presentation, and I'm happy for you to share a PDF of those slides around, by the way, Selwyn.
Yep.
Is 2026 the bolus, and that'll be suitable for beef animals initially. So if you've got, you know, dairy beef, for example, you're running beef animals on your farm, that's the first option. We also do have a new initiative coming up soon on adoption where some of the manure ponds will be looked at. So, but we can't say much more about that yet. But you'll hear that soon. And then, so that's the time frame. 2026 is currently the expected time to market for the bolus. Jock has asked, with putting another pill down the cow's throat, has there been a case study on effect on cow production? And that's a great question. And that's exactly why it's so important that we've got a really robust regulator here in New Zealand, because ultimately, if you're going to slow down production, that's not helping your emissions intensity either. And you don't want to be causing any adverse effect to the animal that would cause a slowdown in their production. So our investments, you know, we have a requirement to try and at least maintain productivity of an animal in production. So the ACVM Ag Chem Veterinary Medicine team for MPI have to go through a really robust process to make sure that these things that are being given to animals, if they are having to go through that process, that is not all of them will. But if it's a pill down a throat, it would. And they have to make sure that it's safe for the animal. They have to make sure it's safe for the meat and the milk as well, and do several studies to determine that. So yeah, really good question, but it's critical. Given the fact that we are a exporter of nearly everything, we've got one of the only regulatory systems in the world that has really specifically got a framework for these types of methane inhibitor products. So I think we're really lucky that we have that. Does make things, you know, a bit slower in some ways than we sometimes like, but it's really, really important to protect our food safety and quality reputation. Daniel, I hope I'm saying your name right. Danielle, sorry. Given the challenges that have been seen in the EU with the launch of the Bovier product, what learnings have we taken on board in New Zealand? That's a really good question, and we've been monitoring that situation as well. You may know that Bovier is not used in New Zealand or available. It's not an investment that we've made because Bovier is not suited really to the New Zealand market. Look, that's a product that's had well over 150 studies done on it in animals, and it has been used all throughout Europe. However, when they did mandate the use, some issues have been reported in Denmark. And at the moment, they've been reported, but they're working through validating if there was an issue with the Bovier or if there was another issue, and also if the issue was real. So we don't quite know yet, but certainly the perception is there. I think mandating farmers to do things rather than incentivizing them, you know, that could be part of the equation as well. But we're really listening and learning on that one because, you know, you can do a lot of research in animals, but actually you need to understand what the users and the farmers are thinking too. And that's really important. Communicating in advance about, I guess, the robust regulatory process is one thing we can do. And we're really lucky we have that in New Zealand. Yeah, and I guess I don't have too much more to say, but it's interesting, and we're keeping a close eye on it, is one thing I can say. Are we not better being paid for milk quality first, Jock? Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I hope you do get paid well for milk quality. And I know that, you know, things like the cooperative difference, there is some different differentiation, I think, that is enabled through there. But certainly, but ultimately, you know, for animal agriculture is part of, you know, it is part of food production. And ultimately, we need to try and produce food for everybody on the planet, a growing population, in a sustainable way, because there are other types of food. You know, people are fermenting things in vats now, so, you know, and alternate things. And for animal agriculture, we just want to be really trying to make sure that we're staying ahead of the game, really, and doing what we can as good citizens to be sustainable. And also, ultimately, the customers demand it. You know, these customers are demanding it, and other competitor markets are making progress. And we really don't want to have a strategy of sitting still here in New Zealand and getting left behind.
I guess that sort of leads on to sort of, you know, what's likely to be the cost per animal, per kg of productive ability or production. So, you know, the thing that came back to probably what we're talking about before, if it's going to cost the farmers $20 for vaccine and it's going to cost an extra $50 per kilogram of seed, there needs to be that return. So I guess one thing that probably AgriZero needs to focus on, you probably already are, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but
no, I'm all ears.
But just the cost that's going to be aligned to some of these things have got to be in line with what farmers are actually getting paid for their milk or their beef. At the moment, everything's sort of booming, but you know, if we have a downturn, again, we always do, then some of these things could outweigh the benefits to each farm.
Well, absolutely. Like, we will not achieve our ambition, which was set on behalf of all of our, you know, shareholders, the agribusinesses and the government, if we don't get adoption on farm. And the only way we'll get adoption on farm is if it makes sense for farmers. So we know it actually can't cost farmers anything, really. The majority of farmers will only use things if they're getting sufficiently rewarded or incentivized to do so. And so that's why you know, we're really working to make sure that the pathways are there to fund the uptake onto farm through the, you know, money through insetting, but looking at actually all sorts of different pathways to ensure that that's going to happen. And again, I talked earlier about an adoption program that's a big part of that work as well, is supporting that uptake, particularly in the early stages, because we also want to be able to build the trust and confidence of farmers by seeing these things being used, understanding how it goes, and that there can be a reward there. Yeah, you're absolutely right, though.
Is organic farms been, I know it's not your brief, but has, you know, is organic farms been invested whether they have more methane or less methane than the sort of run-of-the-mill farmers?
That's a really good question. Farmers? I actually don't know. I don't know about organic farmers specifically, because I imagine there's still a range. But I do know that the solutions, quite a lot of them are suitable for use on organic farms that we're investing in. But as far as the footprint from, we're not climate experts. I'm not a climate expert. We're just really about, again, investing in things to try and give our Kiwi farmers a competitive advantage globally by being able to sell premium, you know, low emission, sustainable product. And I don't know the answer on that organic one, but I'm a bit intrigued now, so I might look into it.
Just obviously, if you're a sheep farm and you got, you know, 4,000 stock units running on the hills out the back of nowhere, it's there's a challenge there. But then again, they wouldn't be producing the amount of methane that a high-producing dairy farm would be. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing. We're trying to solve for all of those different You know, even though we say pasture-based farming system, there's multiple farming systems in New Zealand, as you know, even the system 1 through 5, you know, low and high input dairy farms, let alone you bring in sheep and beef. So, you know, it's certainly not a one size fits all thing. And there's different affordability and different incentives at the moment. You know, there is stronger incentives starting to appear in the dairy space to really drive the uptake of these technologies when they become available. But it's a little bit chicken and egg because they're only just becoming available now. And so those incentives are starting to materialize. And I think Fonterra, I think you can get up to 25 to nearly 30 cents per kilogram of milk solids if you're their sort of top tier, low emissions milk provider. Synlait also have their Lead with Pride program. So there are some things in play, and you know, the likes of Nestle are spending millions of dollars too, supporting mitigation technologies onto farms. But those programs are have been rolling out and starting to roll out more. That needs to grow and grow so we can actually, so Kiwi farmers can afford to use these things on farms when they're available.
How can farmers engage or participate in trials? Is there, you know, how does that work? So if we've got 3 or 4 farmers that may be listening tonight go, well, I wouldn't mind being in a trial. How can they engage in that, or do they get that underway?
Well, I mean, you could email me, but I'm not a trial designer, but
No.
we're really interested in partnering with farmers and groups of farmers who are interested in being early trialers and early adopters of these technologies, and are going to be offering support for that. And I think I've mentioned a few times this program we're working on with adoption. We will be seeking expressions of interest for that publicly when that is available and when it's been opened officially, which is not quite yet. But in the meantime, you know, sign up for our updates. We do have the farmer focus group that I mentioned, but we get out and about around the regional field days and national field days and different events as well, trying to speak to farmers to get them on our mailing list, and so they can signal interest. But we imagine, you know, some of the projects that we'll be running to do these early trials will be kind of consortia of groups of farmers. And if you're supplying Fonterra, Synlait, or A2, or working with, you know, Ravensdown, or sending in dairy beef to Silverfern Farms or Ansco, for example, then they are limited partners of AgriZero and will be also closely involved as we roll out these technologies. So it's good to signal your interest through them as well.
Awesome. Has anyone else got some more questions out there in the chat room?
One other thing I was going to say actually on that is we will have, because of the stage we're in, and we've been sort of working towards getting tools to the market for farmers, and we're kind of nearly there, we're about to start modifying our website too and putting more information specifically about tools and specifically for farmers there. So we'll be able to enable, you know, people can contact us through our website as well if they're interested.
Yeah, because I must remiss, I didn't really know about AgriZero until the topic came to me, and then I had to research, and yeah, it's been very interesting to learn how you're doing it.
We are 16 people, so that's not surprising, and we're only 3 years old. And ultimately, we're doing this on behalf of our partners who've stood us up. Really, you know, that's your Fonterra, for example. So. It's not. I'm not too offended that you haven't heard of us, Selwyn. Don't worry.
I'm just being honest here, but also we were saying the other day you don't actually have offices in here. I said your head office, you don't have one. You're a pretty cut the costs, lean, mean business, even though you've got millions of dollars invested through your group, and but you are lean and mean, and if you are out and about, you're using your partners' office space, etc., aren't you?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we're here to invest in tools and not office space. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really. I think you're leading from the front there. So yeah, very good.
Yeah, it has its pros and cons when you've got 4 kids at home. Let me tell you, when you're trying to do a webinar anyway.
Is there any more questions out there before we wrap this up? Obviously not. Well, thank you very much, Ruth. It's been really informative, and thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I had a list of questions here about 2 pages long, and I just kept ticking them as the slides came up, and the more that you were talking and
Oh,
talking.
really?
So,
Oh,
yes.
good. I'm glad some of those were answered.
No, so it's good
Yeah.
that you've covered the base, I think, really, really well. And yeah, I've got like food additives and inhibitors. I've got low methane breeding, of feed system levers, etc. But you've done all that, so it's been good. That because you don't want to hear me talking, you want to hear from the experts. So, again, thank you very much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure those that are watching have as well, or been listening, sorry, to it. And look, if you've got any questions or whatever for Ruth, as you said, Ruth, you're very contactable. Just drop her an email.
Drop us an email or look on the website. You can contact us there as well.
And there's anything that you go offline and then think, oh, I should have asked her that, please feel free to send her an email, and I'm sure she'll get back to you. So on behalf of the Holstein Friesian New Zealand Association, thank you for your time. I know you got a busy schedule. I think last week tried to make base, but you're overseas working, and we had a quick slot time frame last week, and we had a quick catch up. But it's been really enjoyable. And again, on behalf of the Holstein Friesian New Zealand Association and its members, we thank you for your time, your outstanding knowledge, and we wish AgriZero all the best.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yep, and this will be recorded and put up on YouTube, so there'll be people out there to watch it, so and listen to it. And so, yeah, all the best, everybody, and thanks for those that took time out to listen to this very knowledgeable lady, Ruth Leary from AgriZero. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. See you. Bye.